Okay, so why don't we begin to get underway with apologies for the switch in room, and then as we're introducing folks, we're also simultaneously going to be getting our fourth panelist to join us or rejoin us on Zoom. So that's what's happening in the background. Pay no attention to the guy at the computer who's desperately helping us. Thank you. Okay, so many of you know me. I'm Cara Horowitz. I co-direct our Emmett Institute on Climate Change and Environment here at the Law School, which is the home for all things environment at UCLA School of Law, including our curriculum, our fabulous clinics, our faculty, our wonderful students and alums. And I'm really, really thrilled to introduce today your panelists to talk about what it's like to work on climate change as a lawyer. I forget exactly what we called the panel, something like the climate crisis, tales from inside the fight or something like that. But we have really fantastic panelists, each of whom plays a different crucial role in the work to reduce climate change and the impacts of climate change, especially here in California. All of the people you're going to hear from today are UCLA law grads. And I'm especially grateful to my colleague and good friend Beth Kent, who is an Emmett Institute fellow, who's going to do the heavy lifting. It's not very heavy, but the heavy lifting of actually moderating this panel, and I just get to introduce folks and then I'm listening like the rest of you. So let me go ahead and start with that. So as I said, Beth Kent is an Emmett fellow in environmental law and policy at UCLA, where she's currently co-teaching our California Environmental Legislation Policy Clinic. Do we have any of Beth's current students in the room? Okay. So as you know, in that clinic, our students and faculty work closely with Sacramento legislators and their staff on innovative pieces of California legislation. So thank you, Beth, for moderating today. I have Nikki Buffa here, who's a partner at Latham. Thank you, Nikki. So Nikki is a member of the Environment, Land, and Resources Practice Group at Latham, Watkins, in Orange County. She has extensive experience in environmental policy and conservation, renewable energy, endangered species compliance, crisis management, and I'm sure many other things. She rejoined Latham after serving in the Obama administration, most recently as the Department of Interior Deputy Chief of Staff to the Secretary. And she has extensive experience in DC, even beyond that. So if you're one of our current students or alums who's interested in what it's like to do environmental work from inside the Beltway, Nikki is your girl. Sarah Kozal is also here. So Sarah serves as counsel at the California Independent Systems Operator, or CAISO. Many of you know CAISO as the electric grid and wholesale energy provider in California. Sarah and her colleagues are who we have to thank for the fact that we didn't all lose power in that
Actually, all of you. All of you.
And our Flexor power alerts. Yes. Did you guys get the telephone alerts? Okay, that came from Sarah. So nice job, Sarah. And before she joined CAISO, she worked in energy at a variety of private sector places, so she can talk to you about what firm life is like in that sector if you want. And then when Geneva Thompson, Jerilyn.
I could be last. I'm the oldest.
Jerilyn.
Just
She's a fabulous alum. She's a Los Angeles regional organizer at the Climate Center, which is a nonprofit that advocates for stronger climate policy. You guys had some victories in the legislature this legislative season, so congratulations. She has over 20 years of professional experience. I'm reading from her bio. I'm not meaning to age her myself. Over 20 years of professional experience as a lawyer, environmental advocate, government official, and utility employee. She's served on a variety of different public and private service roles, including as an appointee of President Obama to the North American Advisory Committee, an appointee of Jerry Brown to the executive team at TTSC, and as an appointee of Mayor Villaraigosa to the LA Harbor Commission and Board of Public Works. So thank you, Jerry, for being here today. And then the person who we're trying to connect by Zoom, and we'll welcome again when she actually arrives, is Geneva Thompson, who is the Assistant Secretary for Tribal Affairs at the California Natural Resources Agency. And before that, she was in the counsel's office of the Yurok tribe and worked on issues at the intersection of climate change and the environment, natural resources conservation, and tribal issues. And so with that, I'm happy to turn it over to Beth. I'm really thrilled to hear from all of you today, and I really want to thank you for joining us at UCLA. Oh, and look at the timing.
Look at that.
Geneva. Hi, Geneva. So what you missed, Geneva, was me introducing all of you and welcoming you, and so your timing is perfect. I'm about to hand it back over to Beth to moderate. Thank you all.
All right, thank you so much, Cara, for that great introduction. Welcome to our panel, Lawyers and the Climate Crisis, Views from Inside the Fight. My name is Beth, and I'm joined by 4 fabulous alums who are doing really exciting work to curb climate change, advance clean energy, and elevate diverse and indigenous voices. I'd love to start our conversation by inviting each of you to introduce yourselves and to share a little bit about your current roles and your career paths. So Geneva, since you're joining us from Sacramento, will you please kick us off?
Sure, happy to do so. Can you hear me all right?
Yes.
All right, wonderful. Well, thank you so much for the opportunity to join you all today virtually. I wish I was there in person, but really appreciate all the technology and staff that went into to allow me to join you all virtually here today. OCO everyone, my name is Geneva E.B. Thompson. I am a citizen of the Cherokee Nation and she, her pronouns, and very honored to be appointed as the first ever Assistant Secretary for Tribal Affairs at the California Natural Resources Agency. As a quick, background, the California Natural Resources Agency oversees and supports over 26 distinct departments, conservancies, and commissions with the mission to restore, protect, and manage the state's natural, historical, and cultural resources for current and future generations using creative approaches and solutions based on science, collaboration, respect for all the communities and interests involved. Specifically, my role at the agency is to advance Governor Newsom's tribal affairs policies in the state's environmental and natural resources laws, policies, and programs. Specifically, I work closely with our departments and their tribal affairs programs to advance increased tribal access and co-management of our public lands and identifying opportunities for ancestral land return, either through transferring excess state lands to tribes or funding property transactions. We're definitely excited to get more into all of this later today on our panel. Before taking on this role, I graduated from UCLA School of Law 2016 with specializations in public interest law and critical race studies. I focused my legal education on the intersection of federal Indian law and environmental law, knowing that I wanted a career in that space. After graduation, I worked at Wichita Foundation, where I got to work on a wide variety of different projects, including an Endangered Species Act trial, a lot of National Environmental Policy Act work, National Historic Preservation Act, Section 106 consultations, and cultural resource protections, as well as legal work in the California Environmental Quality Act, as amended by AB 52, and kind of a wide variety of different projects as needed, including property and water law. So after my time at Wichita, I had the honor of representing the Yurok tribe as an Associate General Counsel. When working for the tribe, I developed a wide variety of environmental tribal law, including some rights of nature work, as well as increased protections for the California condor, also known as Pregonish in Yurok language, under that tribal jurisdiction and tribal law framework. I also had, the opportunity to represent the tribe in state and federal tribal courts and other forums as needed in a wide variety of different practices, but really in the space of environmental and cultural legal issues. Really, as you do when you're Associate General Counsel, you represent a wide variety of different issues based on the needs of the tribe and the priorities of the tribal council. So also got to touch a little bit on some property, corporation, and again, some water law. So that's just a quick little intro about me and my career and where I've gone from graduation to now. So thank you.
Thank you so much, Geneva. And we'll go from left to right. So Sarah?
Sure. Thank you for having me. Again, I'm Sarah Kozal. I work at the California Independent System Operator Corporation, CAISO, CAISO. Cara gave you sort of a quick overview. We manage the wholesale energy market and the transmission grid for California and parts of Nevada, and also through our energy imbalance market, a lot of the West. We have a day-ahead market, a real-time market. It gets fairly complex, but I think the easiest way to think about it is you all are buying your power from Southern California Edison or PG&E. I guess the example in Los Angeles is not as good because you're buying yours from LADWP and they're not necessarily transacting in our market in the traditional way. But all of those entities are purchasing their power through our market. They're buying and selling. And so we're the big transmission lines when you're driving on the 5, not necessarily small distribution lines you see kind of around the city. I have been there for a very short time, about a year, but I've been in that field since graduating in 2016. I actually started my career, well, my pre-law career, I was working in museums, I was in the arts and doing education, cultural resource work. My early law school career kind of actually overlapped quite a bit with Geneva. We were the same year, and so we were in a lot of the same classes and clinics together. But I was focusing on tribal work and cultural resource work, and sort of through a fluke met William Boyd, who is now a professor here, but at the time was a visiting professor. And he convinced me to take his class, and I totally changed my career trajectory because of it. And so I ended up in a lot of private practice firms. I was at Western Energy and Water, Stoll Reeves, and Buchalter. And I hopped around quite a bit trying to find the right fit, and then realized that actually it wasn't firm life, or it was firm life that was the real problem for me. But it was fun. I worked on a lot of financing deals. I worked on power purchase agreements. I worked on interconnection agreements. I loved doing all of that kind of stuff. But the parts that I loved about it were really the parts that were tied to either transmission planning or to the market itself, and were more policy related. And so when the first opening at the CAISO in 8 years opened up, I did everything I could to get the job, and I did get the job. And I've loved being there ever since. We'll talk later a bit about more specifics, but yeah, it's a great place to be.
Awesome. Thank you so much, guys. I feel very honored to be here with you guys and with this panel. You guys are awesome, rock stars. Nikki, Buffa, I am a partner at Latham and Watkins. Never ever thought I would say those words. That was not my plan when I went to law school. I started my career at EPA as a career employee in San Francisco at EPA Region 9. And I had a couple experiences there, one of which was, this was years ago, guys, when we were still trying to figure out environmental justice. I was taking a GIS class, and I was making maps in school at the time because I was an intern at EPA at the time. And I was showing my supervisors, like, here are these EJ areas everybody's talking about. Like, I took all the census data, I put RCRA sites on top of them, and I went to the supervisors and I was like, look at these maps, because no one was doing that at EPA yet. And one of the lawyers said to me, so you're telling me that if I can't permit another RCRA facility in this little polygon you made, how am I supposed to do that? That would be arbitrary and capricious. And I thought, holy moly, I have to go to law school because I have no idea what those words mean. And truly, that is one of the reasons, the biggest reason I got motivated, because obviously, like, she was in charge, this lawyer at EPA. So I came to law school thinking I would go right back to EPA. I worked for a judge my first summer just to see what that would be like. And he said that I had to go to a law firm to learn how to write a nasty letter. That I was never going to get that training at EPA, and I actually kind of believed him on that. So I went to Latham for the summer. I thought there were a bunch of old Clinton appointees that were hanging out there during the Bush administration. I'm really dating myself now. And I thought, okay, if the Clinton people can be at Latham, I could be at Latham. Like, let me go try this place out. And I got there, and it was filled with really, really smart lawyers who, like, had very interesting work, very interesting clients. And I thought, okay, I could do this. And frankly, the money wasn't bad. And UCLA had gotten very expensive. When I said yes to UCLA, it was not expensive. By the time I graduated, it was pretty expensive. So I did take my offer in their DC office. I tried to align myself with those partners that I thought I was value aligned with. And it was tough. The first couple of years, you don't have a lot of control over the matters you're getting. And it was very busy, and firm life is tough. And I fell in love with Barack Obama, and I thought, I'm going to go to that campaign. I'm going to help this guy win. And Latham was like, oh, he's not going to win. Just lock your door. We'll see when you get back. And he won. And I went on the transition, and because I had this EPA experience, they had me work on kind of building up the Green Cabinet, helping them figure out who the appointee should be, what the policy issues were. And then after the transition was over, I formally left Latham, and I joined at CEQ, the Council on Environmental Quality. And I went there because I knew at EPA it was the political appointees that were kind of driving the ship, right? That I felt like they were the ones who were making a big difference, or at least they were the ones when they called, we had to jump and do stuff for them. So I wanted to try that out. And I really loved all the jobs I had in the administration. I was there for all 8 years. Public service has always been the thing that's driven me. When the administration was over, I was tired, frankly. It was 8 years. It was a long time. And I thought Latham would be a good place to go back to. I thought Hillary Clinton was going to win. I was going to know everybody in the federal government. I was going to do energy transition. We were going to build offshore wind. It was going to be amazing. And that's not what happened. And I still went to Latham anyway. I ended up moving back to California, where I was born and raised down here in Orange County. I had some family issues and wanted to come home. And so I ended up building a California practice, doing the work I like to do, which is mostly energy transition work. And then Joe Biden gets elected. I go on the transition team. Because of COVID, I was allowed to do that from afar. I didn't actually have to go to DC because my husband would divorce me if I did. So I was able to kind of reprise some old roles. It was a lot of fun to see those guys again. And then suddenly, here we are now, really in the midst of the federal energy transition. Got a lot of clients who are very focused on trying to develop buckets to catch all the money that's coming down, hopefully from the skies on energy transition stuff. And that's what I focus my days on now. So I do love my job. I have a lot of great pro bono projects. Any of you who are thinking about going to a law firm, I'd love to talk to you more about it after this or whenever, because there are ways you can make it work. But that's enough about me for now. Sorry. Talked for a long time.
When did you work with me?
So you and I think I was at EDF. Right. As an extern, my 3rd year in law school. So that would have been 2005.
Okay.
Yeah.
Was I pregnant?
I don't remember.
Oh, no, I wasn't. No, I wasn't.
Life gets measured by that, though.
Yeah, it really does.
Which kid was around then?
So I wanted to point out, we have folks here from class of 2016. Nikki is class of 2006, and I'm class of 1996.
10
So
years. Nice.
we're the sexy sixes.
Yeah, that's right.
So I'm Jerilyn López Mendoza. Thank you for the lovely introduction. She left out that I'm a huge Dodger fan. And that I also took very seriously when they said I could wear whatever I wanted. So I took out my funkiest dress and said, this is the time to wear it.
Yellow, we love it.
I know, it's really fun.
Isn't it
really
something?
Yeah, it's great.
Anyway, so I went to law school to do environmental justice work, and then had some family issues come up, as well as hitting the wall, which I think happens for a lot of public interest students, which is you start applying for jobs, and if you don't get a really fancy fellowship, the jobs always want 3 to 5 years of experience. And I'm like, where am I supposed to go to get 3 to 5 years of experience? And the unspoken answer is a law firm. So I ended up going and working in a couple of different law firms my first few years doing litigation. And I primarily was focused on general litigation, because if I did environmental litigation, I was representing oil companies, and I didn't want to do that. Mm-hmm. So I did that for a few years, and then I went to Environmental Defense Fund in Los Angeles, where I was their attorney and policy director for the Environmental Justice Project Office. And then after that, I was there almost 10 years. After that, there's been a series of different evolutions in my work. I've been, as Cara mentioned, an appointee on the international, state, and local levels, some of which were paid jobs, some of which were citizen oversight jobs. I also worked at 3 different nonprofit organizations. I've worked at 2 different utilities. I've had quite the spectrum of experiences. And my current job is with an organization based in California called the Climate Center. And because I don't want to screw it up, I looked up our mission statement. And it is, the Climate Center is a climate and energy policy nonprofit working to rapidly reduce climate pollution at scale, starting in California. So we have ambitions to take over the world. Right now, we're really focused on California. And I am the LA regional organizer, so I focus on LA. I have so many contacts here. I've done all my professional life in Los Angeles, which I'm very fortunate in that way, at least I think so. And so I've been there a little bit over about a year and a half, and it's been really wonderful. And we do have a really wonderful victory this legislative season that I'll go into later. But that's sort of the breadth and depth of my different experiences.
Thank you all so much. It was really great to hear about your backgrounds and career paths. Now I'd love to dive in a little bit more to the work that you're doing. And so can you please share a case or a project that you worked on in your current role that you think made a difference on climate change? And Jerilyn, since you were previewing one, I'll start with you and then we'll go in reverse order and round it out with Geneva for this one.
So the main goal of the Climate Center is to get California to be carbon neutral by 2035. It's a very ambitious goal, and a lot of people laugh at us, but I think you don't reach the stars unless you shoot for the moon. So we have to be very strategic in how we work towards that goal. One of our policy pillars is to work on nature-based solutions. And this past legislative season, we were able to get a bill passed, I don't remember if it's SB or AB, 1757, and I have to think about it because the number changed a few times. 1757, which is a nature-based sequestration bill. So for those of you who are familiar with that word, sequestration is the word that we use when we're saying we're trying to contain carbon. And right now there's a lot of activity happening in that space because there are some who believe that there are technologies that can capture carbon and sequester it underground using technology. It's an unproven solution, and one that's very controversial because it's being pushed very hard by some entities that have backing from fossil fuel interests, and it's been very controversial on the state level. Our solution is nature-based, which is what we have been using to sequester carbon for millennia. So we were able to get a bill passed that sets some parameters around how the state should be measuring nature-based sequestration so that we're actually quantifying the good work that is being done on working lands, on farms, on all of our state parks, and helping the state figure out how to quantify that sequestration so it's not just lost and it's not considered as part of the solution.
Okay, so projects. I've worked on a variety of different kind of renewable projects, solar, wind, offshore wind. I'm really spending a lot of time thinking about California offshore wind, helping our clients understand kind of what the permitting regime and the prospects are for California offshore wind. A lot of folks believe, and I'm not sure that there have been studies to prove this yet, that we need the offshore wind. Actually, there have been some studies to say prove what I'm going to say. We need the offshore wind to get to our climate goals. Now, where I'm very interested in the idea of all of the impacts that are created from solar and wind, and what those impacts look like per megawatt compared to the impacts out in the offshore context, especially when we're talking about floating platforms. So thinking a lot about ways to try to promote that industry, help smooth the way for it, because the problem with private industry and private energy producers in particular is when things get hard and things get too expensive, they run away, and we end up doing things like keeping Diablo Canyon online for another 10 years. So there are a lot of new things that could be happening in the offshore wind world. So I spent some time on that, but I'd like to talk a little bit about one project that I spent a lot of time on for a large utility, SoCal Gas, and you can all hiss. SoCal Gas, and I said the word gas. Jerilyn used to work there. And it is to help them with their green hydrogen pipeline. So they have a proposal right now to develop a green hydrogen pipeline that would go from somewhere in Utah, somewhere in the eastern part of the state, not even sure yet, into the LA basin and bring 100% renewable green. We can talk about carbon intensity. It would meet the carbon intensity standards the federal government are setting, the ones they just proposed last week. So very good green hydrogen in the LA basin. It is going to be so hard. They are going to need so many lawyers. I am just one of many that they are sure to be hiring. But I have been with them on this project since the very beginning, since they first started thinking about it. And it's interesting because, as we all can talk about, the fossil fuel industry has a lot of issues. I don't love the fossil fuel industry. I don't want to work for the fossil fuel industry. There are a lot of people in the fossil fuel industry that are transitioning, and they want to get out of fossil fuels. They want to take all of their resources, all of their capital. I'm not saying silicon gas is one of those yet, but they want to figure out a way to stay in the energy business within the new paradigm. And SoCal Gas is looking at ways they can do that. They've set a net zero goal for 2035. They want to be at zero. And they're doing everything they can to figure out how to use their existing infrastructure to start pumping in green hydrogen. And it's hard because everybody looks at them and thinks, oh God, it's the fossil fuel industry. I don't want to talk to them. So one of the things that they proposed for Angela's Link, which is the name of this project, which I don't particularly like, but whatever, is to work with stakeholders. Try to have stakeholder engagement meetings, and there's a lot of trust issues. We can't even get stakeholders to come sit in a room with us to talk about this project. And it's hard because these guys actually have a lot of money, they have a lot of experience, some of which not great, for Lisa's opinion, but others good. They've been hundreds of years in this business. And so one of the things we're working on right now is asking the PUC, the Public Utilities Commission, not to approve the project, not even to pay for any part of the project. We're asking them to let us start tracking costs on designing the feasibility study for the project. So the first thing is, can we just see if this is even feasible? Where would this thing go? We have no idea. That costs a lot of money. And the idea is they'd like to get paid back by ratepayers for that expense. So you have to set up what they call a memorandum account application, and then we hopefully get approved and they start studying this thing. That's where we are. We're at the very, very beginning, and it's still really hard. But if this thing gets built, it could transport about a quarter of the natural gas that
Hydrogen.
Thank you. A quarter of the hydrogen that SoCal Gas currently uses and distributes throughout their system. It could absolutely make a difference when it comes to trucks, to diesel trucking. You could see a lot of trucks get converted to hydrogen. Right now those trucks can't really get plugged in. There is a lot of industry in LA that cannot get plugged in. They need the molecules, they need a clean fuel. And without clean fuels, the actual transition to the clean energy economy gets a lot more expensive. Everybody agrees to that. EDF agrees to it, NRDC agrees to it. We've made a lot of friends and everybody agreeing that we need to get green hydrogen here somewhere, and there's a lot of industries that need it. And now it's just a matter of figuring out how to do it. So it's fun, it's challenging, and I think that's a good example.
Yeah, that's great. Thanks, Nikki. Sarah? Yeah, so I was going to talk about one thing, which I will, but I sort of want to mention something about the offshore wind too. Because one of the challenges of being at the CAISO is we're regulated by the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission, and the way that we were set up and other markets are set up is that we're supposed to technically be technology agnostic, and so we have to kind of work out, well, how do we get more offshore wind? And so we deal with a lot of inputs from the CPUC, the CEC, CARB, and trying to figure out how to run our market and how to plan for the transmission to ensure that those types of resources can get online. We have an open access transmission tariff, and so anyone that wants to interconnect is technically supposed to be allowed to interconnect. And so one of the things I'm working on right now is, what are the constraints of that? Can we actually plan for, approve, and build a transmission line that is reserving capacity on it for geothermal in one part of the state, or for offshore wind in another part of the state? Because those resources take a really long time to build, and in that time, others may come in and jump in line that are not as renewable of resources. And so how do we take the state's goals and ensure that our planning and our processes can meet those within the constraints of the Federal Power Act and everything that regulates us. So that's something really interesting that I've been working on, and I think offshore wind is new and exciting, at least on this coast. But what I wanted to talk a little bit about very briefly is the way that the market works and how that intersects with Cap and Invest in Washington State and Cap and Trade in California. This is a really new, exciting thing happening in Washington. They just passed their Cap and Invest legislation. Their rulemaking just concluded yesterday, actually, on their Cap and Invest program. And so, ultimately, all these new resources have some kind of compliance obligation. for their emissions. And in our market, that becomes challenging. We operate a market using something called security constrained economic dispatch. This is what markets use. It means that we are supposed to look at what's most cost effective. So if a coal resource, it's not a great example in California, but a coal resource is cheaper than something else, that should get dispatched first, which is not what I personally want, not what most people want. And so, there's other constraints. The security constraint piece of it is transmission and how the resource can ramp up. There's all kinds of different technical pieces to it too. But the technology part, the fuel type, the resource itself is not supposed to be considered for its environmental attributes. But we now have these really exciting policy overlays like cap and invest, cap and trade, that create an additional cost of running your natural gas facility or running your coal plant. Again, not a great example in California. But what we're doing now, and a project that we're actively working on, is integrating those rules into the market for Washington State. So we run the energy market, day-ahead real-time market in California, but we also run the real-time market for a lot of the West. So we balance a lot of Washington in real time. We are currently expanding that to be day-ahead, which is going to be exciting, and it's going to allow us to integrate more renewables. And the idea here is, as you have a greater geographic footprint, you could have more renewables that operate at different times. If we don't have a lot of solar here, but we have a lot of load that needs generation behind it, we can pull something in from Arizona, like wind, when they don't have a lot of load. And so the greater the geographic footprint, the more renewables that can operate. But we need to reflect those costs of compliance into the bids. So we're now working on how do we create a bid adder. California has a bid adder, so anyone bidding into the state of California has this additional cost put on their bid so that they don't look cheaper and they're not dispatched. And we're working on the same thing for Washington right now. It would be really wonderful if they were linked jurisdictions in their program, but they are not. So we are having to create separate rules for them, but hopefully in the future we'll have one program and one framework. And there's a lot of different interests here, and that's been really challenging to deal with the stakeholders who, it comes down to dollars for a lot of these different resources, and so making sure we get that number right is really important, both from the stance of ensuring that the renewables survive, and also the reliability side, making sure that we continue to operate the grid reliability, and then from the environmental, again, personal side, that I think for a lot of people here too, ensuring that the right resource mix is what's getting dispatched. So it's fun. Thanks, Sarah.
Geneva?
Yeah, thank you. So we're working on, a wide variety of projects here at CNRA, and especially in the climate space. But one that I really wanted to highlight with you all today, and it's also a nature-based solutions project. I'm, excited to be one of the team members that are working on the implementation of Governor Newsom's nature-based solutions executive order. And really, my task on that team is to ensure that California Native American tribes and their priorities are integrated throughout all of our nature-based solutions policies and programs and initiatives. And so it was actually one of my earlier tasks when joining the agency was to develop our tribal consultation and engagement strategy for the development of our nature-based solutions policies and then implementation of that executive order moving forward. And so we got to consult and meet with over 70 different California Native American tribes to identify their priorities in the nature-based solutions space, also to learn a bit more about how the climate crisis and the biodiversity crisis are impacting their communities, their ancestral lands and waters. And so through that year-long process of where we met with 70 different tribes, we received a lot of input and guidance and on how to develop two of our nature-based solutions strategies. So the first one being the Natural and Working Lands Climate Smart Strategy, and the second one being the Pathways to 30 by 30 initiative. And so the Natural and Working Lands Climate Smart Strategy looks at how we as a state can work with our lands, both the natural and the working, to address the climate crisis. And so that's, looking at, an example I like to use is our agricultural practices. How do we shift those practices to build healthier soils? And so those soils can then sequester and hold carbon. How do we look at our wetlands and what restoration projects go into those wetlands? And so that also can be a carbon sink. So that's what that Natural and Working Lands Climate Smart Strategy is looking at, and really lays out a lot of initiatives through out the 8 different regions within the state. And then the second strategy is our Pathway to 30 by 30, which really lays out how the state is moving forward in conserving 30% of California's lands and coastal waters by 2030. And this is a voluntary strategy to work with folks across the state in conserving those lands and waters, not only to address the climate crisis, but also to address the biodiversity crisis, which is very clearly linked. So my task in that is the tribal affairs piece to all of that, and really excited that both of these strategies have a core commitment of strengthening partnerships with tribes. And this core commitment of partnering with tribes in this space really comes out of the respect and acknowledgement that every piece of land and waters within the state is somebody's ancestral lands and waters, and that those tribes whose these lands and waters are their ancestral lands are the original stewards of these natural resources, of these places, and have that deep place-based traditional expertise and traditional ecological knowledges that have been formed over generations and are tailored to the unique species, lands, waters, and interconnected with the humans who have lived with those resources. And so understanding where tribes are coming from and their deep place knowledges, it's essential that we are partnering with tribes and to ensure that they can continue their connections with these lands and waters and really, work with us in partnership to address, the climate crisis in these areas. It's also hugely important that this core commitment to partner with tribes is coming out of the acknowledgement that, even before the creation of the state of California, tribes have suffered from harmful policies and state-sanctioned genocide that have really forcibly removed tribes from their ancestral lands and natural resources. And this forced removal and genocidal practices have really led to destructive outcomes, not only in tribal communities, but also has had widespread ramifications to the health of our lands, plants, and animal species. And that all of this now is being intensified by the climate crisis. And so really the idea is, by partnering with tribes to return the stewardship and co-management of these lands and waters, we can also work to start to address those historical wrongs and move forward, in the spirit of truth and healing. And so I'm excited to play my role in that piece and really finding opportunities that we can basically get out of tribes' ways and ensure that their tribal expertise can lead to and inform habitat restoration, build more resilient lands and waters, increase those nature-based solutions, carbon sequestration practices, and really ensure that tribal expertise can be a leading solution to a lot of these crises we're looking at. One example of this that I like to share, and because it's being discussed pretty broadly now as a positive example, is the application of cultural burns and the growing evidence that when cultural practitioners apply these cultural burns to the lands, it not only builds resiliency for those landscapes from the wide wildfires that we're facing, but it supports the growth of culturally and environmentally important species. that allows for habitats to be restored, allows for increased growth of traditional foods, allows for reconnection of native people to the lands. And, there's even growing evidence that it improves soil health. And so basically allowing the cultural practitioners to do what they do best, the lands and species are benefiting from those traditional ecological practices. And so that's a project I'm working on. I'm very excited about it, and really working with California Native American tribes to see how we can really grow in this space. Something that I'm excited that we have just been appropriated from the California legislature $70 million to establish the Tribal Nature-Based Solutions Program. And so now we have, some money in place where we can then support our tribal partners in their priorities and in their nature-based solutions work. And so we're in the very early stages of developing that project, or that program, and it's going to be tribally led, and just looking forward to being in this space and sharing a little bit what we're doing here.
Thank you so much, Geneva. Well, it sounds like we're in very good hands with all of these panelists taking care of things from the environmental law perspective. But as you know, a lot of the folks in the audience are not environmental law folks, or we have a really nice mix here, which I think is one of the great things about this LEAD convening. So how can lawyers who don't practice environmental law in their daily work or in their careers support efforts to curb climate change, either in their professional and personal lives? So we'll start with Sarah, and then Geneva, and then bring it back around this way.
Oh, sure. This is an interesting question, because I think, everyone thinks about, like, what are the big impacts I can make. One of the things happening in California through the energy transition is, and in other places, is this emphasis on shifting the time of day that we're utilizing things, utilizing the grid. In the past, we have the energy market, but under California law, you're required as a load-serving entity, so an IOU or an SCE, the big utilities, and small utilities, they're required to procure enough resources to meet their peak load, plus an additional planning margin. And so these are bilateral contracts that they are contracting for, and then through those contracts, those energy resources are required to bid into the market. And so that's where we get a lot of the generation. What we're seeing in California now is this hope and this planning for a shift to utilizing your washing machine, your dishwasher, things in the middle of the day, turning your thermostat down, and shifting our planning into these hour slices. So we'll be planning for resource adequacy by the hour, essentially, and so the load serving entities will be required to contract within those hours. It's not going to play out exactly like that, but the idea is, again, that we're hoping and we're seeing consumer demand kind of shifting in response to some of these environmental concerns. And so, my greatest hope is that people really take that to heart and start seeing, okay, we've got a lot of solar in the middle of the day, we've got a lot of, well, maybe wind is not so much in the middle of the day, but how can we shift our usage, charge our electric cars in the middle of the day, change that, what the demand curve looks like, and then that will then, trickle down, I guess, into this contracting where we're not having a contract for so many natural gas resources because we need to plan for this extreme peak at the end of the day. Hopefully in the future we won't have that extreme peak. And so I think that plays into your personal life, but it also can play into your professional life. I live in Sacramento, a lot of the firms up there have, they're I don't know what they're called, but they have some kind of program that changes the temperature in the building and kind of shifts the usage there. So I think that's something that you can kind of bring to your professional life too.
Yeah, I think that's great. Geneva?
Yeah, well, I think something that folks can do is really identify ways to like support California Native American tribes and their priorities, and this idea of that, knowing that tribes are have limited capacity, and for many of them also underserved communities are pretty strained in their resources. And so if there's anything you can do in your practice or in your personal life that would help support tribes to be secure, right? So that's either economically, culturally, health considerations, child welfare, criminal justice reform, there's a whole gamut of items, right? If tribal communities are more secure, then they'll have more space and capacity to be able to practice their cultural, ceremonial, and land management practices, which then allows for those deep place-based knowledges to be applied to the lands and have them be more climate resilient, addressing the biodiversity crisis and some of these concerns that we have. And so for folks who are looking, for in their practice, consider doing some pro bono work for tribal governments, relieve, some of those legal capacity barriers that tribes have, for your own, just for yourself, and what maybe you could support tribes and tribal enterprises, staying in tribal hotels, purchasing items from tribally run businesses, and lastly, kind of bringing awareness to tribal issues. And so if a local tribe in your area is highlighting a concern that's impacting their community, be an ally, be a support for those issues that they're working on. And anything that we can do to try to alleviate a lot of those capacity barriers and burdens, I guess, that tribes are feeling, the more flexibility they will have to be, I guess, for the tribal communities to live their best lives and in connection with the land.
That's great. Thank you, Geneva. Jerilyn, especially in your role at a nonprofit, what are things folks can be doing?
How much time do we have? Okay. So a couple of things immediately spring to mind. One is directly related to my organization, the Climate Center. We have a Climate Safe California campaign that we run that has specific principles and pillars related to it. The principles include making sure that those who have been left behind in climate solutions from, for example, low-income and of-color communities are centered in the solutions that come up now. So basically focusing on climate justice. Another is making sure that families that are reliant on fossil fuel for their livelihoods are also not left behind as we move into a greener economy, that we make sure that they're, I hate to use the term, but it's overused, but make sure there's a just transition for people who are making a good wage in a fossil fuel job, where they can switch to a cleaner, more renewable source of energy for their livelihoods, that they be also given a good living wage to take those jobs. And then thirdly, I forget. So I apologize for that. I had them in my head, and then I was listening to Geneva, and I was like, oh, I forgot the third one. But what you can do is you can personally, as an individual, you can endorse the campaign. And what it does is we're very close to having 1,700 businesses, individuals, elected officials, and municipalities endorse the campaign. So that means when we sit down with elected officials, we can say we have 1,700 people who believe in our campaign, who believe in the principles and what we're trying to do to accomplish net zero carbon by, or net negative carbon by 2035. And it's very powerful. Since I've been there, we've gone from, I think, around 1,200 to almost 1,700. So that's something you can do individually. It doesn't cost anything. And then you're on our list so that when we send out action alerts to say, please let your senator or your state senator or your state assembly member know that they should vote in favor of this bill that maybe has to do with nature-based sequestration. All you have to do is click a couple of things and fill in your address, and it'll automatically send it to your elected official specifically. So it's a very simple, easy thing to do. So if you go to our website and you look up the Climate Safe California campaign, just click on it and it'll take you to the endorsement, and it'll also tell you the 3 things that I forgot. So I apologize for that. And then secondly, I mean, the other thing to think about is how you can partner with those who are doing what I call more traditional lawyering for climate. So Earth Justice is an excellent organization that is primarily, you know, the Earth needs a good lawyer. And Earth Justice, either if you wanted to support them financially or if you wanted to work with them on a pro bono basis, I would suggest you looking into that. NRDC is another one that also would welcome both financial support as well as possibly partnering with them on a pro bono basis. There was a third one that I was just thinking about. Oh, the Center for Biological Diversity. And they work on a whole lot of stuff. And they're all over the country, as is both Earth Justice and NRDC. So I really think that if you wanted to partner with them on a pro bono basis, there might be opportunities there. But certainly offering financial support for the litigation work that they're doing, I think would be really important and would really help to advance a lot of climate issues in the court.
Thank you. And all of those organizations have internships and externships for law students too. So we got everybody in this room covered if they want to.
And it's easier to get a job as an intern or an extern than it is when you graduate. So get those jobs now while you're still in law school, I think. So everything these guys said, 100%. I think if you find a project or something you believe in or you agree with, you can get involved in that process. There are hearings that are constantly happening. They always want to hear from the public. Come to a public meeting. Come to a public meeting and say, like, I'd love to see this project happen, or I'd hate to see this project happen. Like, get involved, because it actually does matter. But the most important thing, and I am not telling you how to vote, but is to go vote. Like, there is nothing like a change in administration or a change in Congress, a change in the Supreme Court to affect climate policy in this country. Nothing like it. So however you want to do it, vote for whatever side you want to vote for, but like find yourself a purple county, a purple congressional district, a purple state, go there, knock doors, like help them. Like, this is actually a thing that matters. So, you know, I see it every day that what a change means in administration. So can't tell you how important that is.
Thank you so much. And we have just 2 more minutes. I'm very tempted to take a question. Are they going into a break? Okay, we'll take some questions. If folks need to leave, that's okay. Yes, right here.
Yes, so thank you for all of you sharing your thoughts on this topic. And I'm really glad that you're all here because you have very different backgrounds from public administration, NGO, and the corporate side as well, which is like all different perspectives and all different interests in this topic. And my question is, sector by sector, what is the biggest obstacle, the biggest challenge, and what would you need from the other sector to contribute to implement climate change policies and action?
I can go first. So I am, I guess, technically corporate, but a little agency-ish. I think the biggest obstacle that I see is sort of stagnant thinking. In the CAISO, we have a lot of, and this is not anyone in particular, but we have a lot of people who have been there for a long time or been in the industry for a long time. And so Nikki mentioned Aliso Canyon, which is the, oh no, you mentioned Diablo Canyon.
I did mention Aliso too, I did both.
Okay. Aliso Canyon, the large gas storage facility. You know, we, as the CAISO, we just study things. We don't say we should keep it or not keep it. But we have a lot of people who say, like, you know, we have to have it. We can't think about it. We can't think, like, we can't imagine a world without it. And so actually from the nonprofit sector, even though technically we're nonprofit too, we see a lot more forward thinking, I think. And so that, I think, you know, is slowly sinking its way in. There's a lot of young people who have training in environmental, you know, environmental backgrounds, and that's changing. But I think there's just been a lot of stagnant thinking in the energy industry, and so that's when I personally always look to a lot of the nonprofits for that, you know, more, what can you see the world to actually be in the future?
I have to jump on this because the gas company when they announced the hydrogen pipeline, they said, okay, if we can get this hydrogen pipeline, that's the way to close Kozal. It's the first time they said this is actually the way we can do it. If we can get this hydrogen in, and you know, I would like to believe that that's all true, and they've done the modeling, it says it's true, but it's very interesting because if I think of an impediment to some of the things I'm working on, it's things I care about. It's people standing up and saying, I have a problem with this project, we need to fix it in this way or that way, which is great. But that dialogue takes a decade, or it takes 2 decades, and the money goes away, and things disappear, and the administrations change, and now the project's gone. So some way to somehow continue to have the dialogue, continue to make these projects better, but just do it faster, please. And I'm putting myself out of business by saying that, because I make money by people fighting with each other. But I don't like it, and I would like to see things go quicker. And I think there is a lot of energy right now in the state legislature to fix it. Manchin has permitting bill, I don't love it, but you know, everybody's trying to think of ways to speed things up. We were going to talk a little bit about the future of environmental climate law, like what are we seeing? And one of the things I'm seeing is thinking about ways that we can reduce permitting time, we can reduce litigation time, still have the litigation, but let's not drag it out 10 years. Let's put the court on a timeline so we can get to a resolution and get to it quicker.
Yeah. Okay. So the biggest obstacle we have, at least from my perspective, working from my organization, is a lack of political will. There is an acknowledgement that we are in an emergency state. You know, it comes all the way from the United Nations and the Secretary General that we are in crisis. And we see it every day in terms of the global climate changes that are occurring. I mean, Hurricane Ian, although there are always hurricanes in Florida, the number and the power with which the hurricanes are growing, I think, is related to climate change. But we still have an awful lot of interests that don't want us to move in a renewable energy direction, that are giving a lot of money to decision makers in Sacramento. So that's why I want to emphasize one of the things that Nikki said, which is to vote, but to also comment and to show up and to be involved in decision making. Because to the extent that those decision makers hear from you, and they're not necessarily relying on only who gives them the most money for their campaigns, but they're hearing from people in the public who deeply care about these issues, that's how we get to change. And we're at a point now we can't wait.
Geneva, final thought, and then we'll wrap us up.
Sure. I think something that would be one obstacle that I've been seeing is that at times tribes have not been early engaged or early consulted with on projects, which then down the road leads to leads to impacts that could have been avoided to tribal interests and tribal priorities. And so I think a solution across all sectors would be to engage in early, often and meaningful government-to-government consultations with the goal of collaborating with tribal governments in the development of projects. And so if that is the goal in the very beginning, and that's everyone's mindset, a lot of impacts to either cultural resources or other tribal priorities can be avoided. And so really something that we're hoping to encourage here at CNRA is that early, often and meaningful government-to-government consultation with that goal towards collaborative problem solving.
Thank you. And I know we're a couple minutes over, so I'm going to cut us off, but I could certainly talk to this group of panelists all day. And if folks have questions, please come down, introduce yourselves, and we can continue these conversations offline. Thank you.
For those of you that want MCL credit, you can come over here and sign up for it.
Thank you.
Thank you, Geneva. Geneva, if you stand, take a panel.